Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the FSDC Industry Exchange Series. My name is Rocky Tone, and I'm the Director and Head of Policy Research for the FSDC. Today, we are launching a report called the Cementing Hong Kong's Role as a Premier Private Wealth Management Hub in Asia. And we are delighted to have four gentlemen with us on the panel. To my left is Mr. Peter Stein. He is the CEO and Managing Director of the Private Wealth Management Association. Then in the middle, it is Mr. Jeremy Lam. He is a partner and head of financial service practice at Deakins. He's also a board member of the FSDC. To my left, it is Dr. King Yao. He's the executive director who runs the operation of the FSDC. And joining us online, he's in Spain, enjoying his well-deserved vacation, is Mr. Mark Shipman. He's a partner with FIFA Chance, and he is also a member of the New Business Committee. So asset and wealth management industry is a core competitiveness of Hong Kong's offering as an international financial hub. And enhancing our competitiveness in this area is absolutely something that the FSDC is trying to work on. Obviously, strengthening our competitiveness in this regard is one of the four key topics covered by the FSDC. And we are very delighted to have the panelists with us today to share their views on why we are doing this and why there are some of the key elements we want to promote to the government and regulators for consideration. Without further ado, I will pass the floor to Mr. Jeremy Lam to walk us through some of the key findings of our research report. After which, we are going to have a Q&A session. And that is going to first start by having some planted questions that we have prepared for you. But please do fire your questions away in the Q&A box, and I'll be asking the panelists afterwards. So without further ado, Jeremy, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So before we have the panel discussion, I've been asked to spend 5 to 10 minutes just taking you through the paper that's been issued today, so you'll have a bit of a flavour of what's in it, and then also that will help with the discussion. So just starting off, the paper starts off with a few remarks on digitalisation, the private wealth management in Hong Kong and its importance. And there's a number of reasons why we thought that this would be a good theme to start on. And you'll see from the slide there sort of four key areas where we thought that this was very relevant. First being sort of culture. And it'll be no surprise to anyone in the financial services industry that really there's been an ongoing shift to basically the use of digital technologies in terms of accessing investment services. And really it's become the norm now that we've moved rather than we've moved into the digital area. And so we're going to look at from a financial services perspective how that is delivered. Customer experience is key to this. And you'll see that from this slide, we're in an era of high-speed technology. Clients expect information to be delivered to them immediately. They want full accessibility, transparency, irrespective of what they are. So in terms of looking at Hong Kong's competitiveness and the industry and how we need to operate, again, it's all around customer experience. And that segues into the next point around distribution and sales, that many banks already are leveraging technology to improve their distribution and sales strategies, and with the use of big data and AI-driven automation to facilitate that, to deliver targeted and personalized customer wealth management services. And last but not least, there's opportunities relating to the mainland Chinese market. And obviously, studies have identified that the mainland market is a key driver for wealth, and basically we need to be able to deliver the services in a digital format because that is what clients want. So the paper, in looking at Hong Kong's competitiveness and what needs to be done to enhance that, explores a number of specific issues. And these issues weren't just plucked out of thin air. They were plucked out having regard to feedback from the industry. We canvassed a lot of financial institutions, service providers within that. And we basically whittled it down to these key areas. So there's AML practices and private wealth management. We're going to sort of look at what the current framework is for that. What are some of the pain points and things that need to be done to enhance that? Critical also is the professional investor regime and the sophisticated professional investors in Hong Kong. Obviously, in private wealth, the institutions are looking to target individuals, and basically we will look at what qualifies or who qualifies as a professional investor and some of the issues around that. The suitability framework in Hong Kong, there's a sort of very complex regime in place which requires financial institutions to go through a very detailed, complex suitability framework before being able to offer products basically at the moment to any investor, irrespective of sort of net worth and sophistication. So we went on to we're going to look at some of the implications around that, as well as the changes we think that need to be made. There are sort of, whilst I think certainly progress has been made from a tax perspective in making Hong Kong more competitive, there's certainly areas that still need to be re-examined, and we're going to touch upon some of those. And last but not least, the importance of education and talent development. It's critical for the industry that basically we are bringing up talent to as the industry continues to grow, and we're going to discuss how that can be done. So in terms of, first of all, on the sort of the AML issues, industry, the feedback from industry and also practitioners and advisors to the industry, there's a feeling that there's still quite a number of regulatory challenges that are faced. And one of these challenges is in relation to the group-wide AML systems, and in particular, the requirement for an overseas branch or subsidiary undertaking of a Hong Kong incorporated authorized institution to apply the higher of the requirements of the jurisdiction where the overseas branch or subsidiary undertaking is located. So that's known as the host jurisdiction, and Hong Kong, if the AML requirements in host jurisdiction in Hong Kong differ to the extent that the host jurisdiction's laws and regulations permit. So really this can involve a sort of significant increased burden in going through the AML, and the report we discusses that in a bit more detail, and we'll come out with some recommendations on that. But one of the key areas that around AML is that the cost of doing it and also the time taken for institutions to go through this process. And there was a report based on the PWMA and KPMG did an annual survey in 2021. And whilst the average client onboarding for PWM institutions had witnessed a slight improvement from 40 business days in 2021 to 36 business days in 2021, it's still quite a long period through which to go through that. And notwithstanding this shorter period, 80% of those surveyed still considered that sort of KYC obligations and the regulatory areas surrounding this were one of the most sort of resource intensive things that their institutions had to do. So we're in no way sort of suggesting that we're looking to sort of reduce KYC. It's an important part in ensuring the integrity of the system. But basically, the recommendations you'll see on the right of the screen are aimed at facilitating perhaps some new best practices and some FAQs that sort of can be developed, particularly for the private wealth management industry. And we would hope that in doing so, that those would be sort of endorsed by the HKMA and the SFC, really to help promote greater consistency and clarity to the industry on the onboarding process, irrespective of which regulator is going to be assessing that. We also, from a recommendations perspective, I think it's important that government involvement and support continue as regards the technology and client onboarding. Obviously, we have sort of I am smart technology already. But we do think that sort of going forward, one of the longer term solutions to this is going to be leveraging technology to make sort of one much more seamless process, both for the clients as well as for institutions as well. And last, one of the recommendations is developing a more facilitative regulatory regime for family offices, and that the financial services industry can benefit from better clarity and guidance from the regulators on the framework applicable to Hong Kong-based family offices. And there's been a push basically to promote Hong Kong as a centre for family offices, and we're seeing an increase in the setup of family offices, but that also is going to require the regulations to continue to sort of facilitate the development of that area. Now, sort of moving on, another area which is particularly fundamental to this and Hong Kong's competitiveness is the professional investor regime and the sophisticated professional investors in Hong Kong. Now, the sort of the current position that we have really is this has evolved over time. And since the financial crisis in 2008, some changes were made to the regime. And some of those basically have been introduced in codes of conduct. But really, in one of these changes was back in March 2016. There was different categories of professional investor introduced into the code of conduct. So you have institutional professional investors. You then have corporate professional investors, and sort of two categories of corporate professional investors, depending on whether or not they could qualify by reference to certain thresholds, and also individual professional investors. And you'll see from the screen there that there's some relevant financial thresholds that have been in place for those professional investors for some while. And the point that you'll see from the report and the discussions that at the moment, as regards individuals, is that regardless of your sort of net worth or sophistication, if you are an individual, that there are certain regulatory obligations that financial institutions need to go through that cannot be waived, irrespective of actually your sort of net worth and sophistication. So we're going to come on to talk about that. But basically, our recommendations were that because this is so fundamental, and the whole concept and the regime we have around professional investors was introduced many years ago, that we actually recommend that it should be reviewed in its entirety to reposition Hong Kong into sort of a more dynamic centre, particularly being a wealth management hub, and particularly in light of the opening up of the Greater Bay Area. So one thing that we want to make clear is that, and you'll see when you read the report, that we're not, however, recommending a sort of a review of the product offering and the private placement safe harbors. We think that those work, and they've been in place since 2003. But we think that there is some merit in looking at the financial thresholds for determining who qualifies as a professional investor, and in particular, the knock-on effect of the suitability regime and how the suitability regime can be improved. So moving on, and in turn, you're going to hear that from the discussion today, the suitability framework, it is a significant regulatory imposition that institutions need to go through if they're going to make recommendations products. And so what we basically, this report sort of draws out that we think that we need to sort of step back a little bit. We need to sort of reconsider the regulatory intent and the application around suitability to basically to make it more, to make it more applicable, both from a sort of an industry perspective and also from a sort of a client onboarding perspective. And there's a number of things that we're going to come on to suggest as to how that may be done, but there are already some exceptions to that, one of them being the portfolio-based approach, which has been available to banks for some while, but actually in practice, that banks haven't really been able to utilize that because they feel that the regulatory regime around that actually doesn't facilitate it. And one of the recommendations that we're going to sort of talk about is the ability to disapply suitability in certain circumstances and for certain categories of individuals. So as I mentioned in the beginning, right now, under the existing framework, if you are an individual, basically irrespective of net worth and sophistication, you're treated as a retail investor. And we've made some recommendations that actually we believe is appropriate to carve out some professional investors from that, individual professional investors. And that's by reference to an assets test, where actually we're basically recommending that current thresholds be increased from 8 billion Hong Kong dollars to 40 billion of portfolio or total assets of not less than 80 million, excluding main residence. We also are recommending the introduction of another category of individual or corporate professional investor whom suitability can be waived, where they demonstrate a certain level of appropriate they have appropriate understanding and sophistication around their investments and understanding of it that should also allow them to be exempted. So we call that a sophisticated professional investor. Just moving on, obviously tax is crucial. And at the moment, as I mentioned, look, I think we have made some good headway generally in terms of dealing with some of the tax issues, but certainly there's certain aspects of the current tax system that may undermine the intention for ultra high net worth individuals or as asset owners to sort of further use Hong Kong as a domicile or Hong Kong product. And so there have been some sort of tax policy recommendations that have already been made concerning the promotion of family offices setting up in Hong Kong. And basically our recommendations are that applying the same treatment for investment by personal investment companies as individuals, and also removing the existing deeming provisions under the unified tax exemption. And we'll say a little bit more about that in the discussion. So moving on in terms of sort of education and talent development, obviously over the last number of years, there's been an increased focus on this, and that's good. There are already various undergraduate and postgraduate degrees that can be done. There's internship programs that have been launched, and those have been successful to date. There's also mid-career transfer and overseas mainland talent. So they're basically schemes to sort of looking to sort of basically facilitate sort of career changes and attract overseas talent. And there are schemes which deal with sort of continued skills enhancement, and all of that is good. But in terms of just taking that to the next step, in terms of recommendations, we believe, and we've recommended that perhaps there should be a more robust master's program in wealth management in Hong Kong. So again, specifically targeting sort of the asset management area, and there's a number of there's ways to do that. So it can be leveraged off some of the existing undergraduate programs. We think that facilitating the mid-year transfer of overseas individuals, again, that in line with recommendations that have been made in the family office paper, we think that scheme can be further enhanced. And as an ongoing thing, really continuing to nurture sort of collaboration between universities and the industry. And already there's been a lot of good work done in this respect. But in terms of being sort of more specific and really trying to tap the potential talent at the earliest possible time, we think that actually there can be sort of more direct collaboration between industry and indeed universities themselves as well, directly to sort of make sure that the pipeline of talent continues. So really, in a nutshell, those are some of the issues contained in the report and the recommendations. I'm now going to hand back to Rocky to start the discussion, and perhaps we'll talk in a little bit more depth about some of those particular issues. So Rocky, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much for walking us through the background of the report as well as the recommendations we have put forward for the government and regulators' consideration. Now we're going to start our panel discussion. Like I mentioned earlier, we have prepared a few questions for gentlemen. But then if we aren't addressing all the questions that you may have, please do share your thoughts with us in the Q&A box, and then I'll be asking the gentlemen, the panelists, the questions that you address in the Q&A box later. So King, the first question is for you. Obviously, you have a very strong asset management background. And actually, just like Hong Kong, we have a very strong asset and wealth management industry as well. So in last year, in 2021, we have seen the AUM of asset and wealth management business growing by 2%. We also see that staff in the asset and wealth management business growing by 12% in the same year. Then if we are already doing so good, why are we at the FSDC feeling that it's the right time to do another research report on this?
Thanks, Rocky. Let me first thank Jeremy and the working group for their valuable contribution to this very timely and important paper. I'll explain why I said that, because Hong Kong, as one of the top international financial centers, is also the largest asset and wealth management hub in Asia. According to the SFC, Asset and Wealth Management Activities Survey, the AUM held by private banking and private wealth management stood at 1.4 billion US dollar. Obviously, we have some headwinds recently. So despite a year-on-year decrease of 6%, the AUM held by private wealth management business still accounted for 1/3 of the total AUM of the industry. So that's very significant. And also, Hong Kong is currently the world's second largest booking center, managing 2.3 trillion US dollar, just short of Switzerland's 2.5 trillion. This obviously is based on strong demand from the ultra high net worth investors in the region. So as stated in the SFC survey, more than 50% of the total AUM by the private wealth management industry were actually sourced from non-Hong Kong investors, actually most of which were from Asia Pacific region. And therefore, it is very important for Hong Kong to maintain our competitiveness as a private wealth management hub to capture emerging opportunities brought by the growing wealth and the needs for top quality services from nearby regions, such as the Bay Area, which is just next door. It is also worth highlighting that 96% of the total AUM of the private wealth management industry actually was from professional investors, according to the report. So this is the main reason why our private wealth management team decided to take a deep dive into the current professional investor regime, given the importance of the PIs to the industry.
Thank you very much, King. That's very helpful. It's because of the strong market demand, and it's also because of the density of how we are serving the professional investors. Jeremy, you highlighted some background and adding to what King was already saying, in his answer to the first question. So can you perhaps highlight some of the emerging trends that you are seeing in the private wealth management industry? Why does the paper put emphasis on our regulatory regime?
Yes, thanks, Rocky. I think in terms of emerging trends, as we said, the paper starts off, it's the way that these services are delivered and sort of digitally. So I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but certainly in terms of how the services are delivered and the expectation around clients, I think continues to emerge. The availability of product and the type of product that clients are looking to sort of seek out, again, continues to emerge, and that's across the whole investment theme. Whether, and also we're seeing particularly now ongoing interest in sort of ESG related. But one of the core themes of the paper is around sort of regulation. And you ask, why is there so much emphasis on regulation? And really, the reason is simple: is that regulation dictates what you can do, how you do it, and with whom you can do it. And I think it's as simple as that. And the where we are in Hong Kong at the moment is, we're sitting in a very well regulated environment. We're an international financial center, and the industry operates to the highest of standards. And we're in no way seeking to lower any of these standards. We're in no way seeking to lower the protection that ultimately investors need and deserve. One of the things, though, that we're looking to sort of do is to make some of these current restrictions, to modernize them, just to reflect. For example, when we're going to talk about some of the thresholds for determining whether someone is a professional investor. Those thresholds are very old. We believe it's appropriate for them to be reset. But it's really around facilitating, sort of striking a balance between allowing the industry to operate more efficiently through regulation and the overall service that can be delivered to clients. I mean, through discussions with the industry, the feedback also was from clients that actually that some of the regulations, some of the processes that the clients need to be taken through because the requirements don't have a carve out. Actually, investors were very resistant to that. And it really wasn't fit for purpose in terms of what it was ultimately seeking to achieve. So obviously, if you're a complete retail investor, absolutely, we're not seeking to in any way change that. But really, it's just being a bit more focused around relaxation of the requirements for certain categories of professional investor with their consent. So obviously, it's not a mandatory system where automatically some of the investor protections, particularly around suitability, are going to be carved out. It's an investor, if they qualify, they make an informed decision and they opt out. But really, until the regulatory environment facilitates that, then really we're not going to be able to sort of to move forward in a manner that we believe Hong Kong needs to remain competitive and for it to be sort of more reflective in terms of the sector now and the type of services that are being offered, how they're being offered, and ultimately to whom they're being offered.
Thanks, Jeremy. As a regulatory expert, you always highlight how we need to ask ourselves what, how, and who we are dealing with, like in terms of the regulations, in terms of the policies. And it is very important to highlight that we are not trying to lower the standard or to compromise in investor protection in our recommendations, but really just to recommend some suggestions for the government's consideration to improve the efficiency and the client experience. That's very important. Peter, now I have a question for you. With the PWMA, the Private Wealth Management Association, you are dealing with all these who's who in the private banking industry day in, day out, right? So what are some of the things that your members or the audience are asking you? And do you see any other specific trends that would be of interest to the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Rocky. And firstly, I just want to say that I absolutely echo everything that Jeremy just mentioned with regard to the need not to lower the standards of regulation, but to right-size them and to simply make them more appropriate for the client segment that we're dealing with when it comes to private wealth management. And what we're seeing is that there is a demographic within this client base who is fairly sophisticated, who can be very active traders at times. And they're not necessarily the majority of clients, but they are a rather important part of the industry because they are more active than other clients. And the regulations, unfortunately, do not really cater to that group of clients as well as could be the case. One example of this is the importance of family offices, which was mentioned before. This is a section of the private wealth management industry that is growing in significance and impact. According to the 2021 Hong Kong Private Wealth Management Report, which is published by the PWMA and KPMG, 77% of the institutions that were surveyed agreed that family offices are an increasing source of business for their organization. And these are institutions which are often staffed by people who are implementing sophisticated trading and investment strategies. And these rules don't necessarily work for them as well as they do for, let's say, retail investors. Now, we've already seen some changes in the regulation that are meant to make it easier for some of these family offices to be exempted from some of the suitability obligations. But we haven't seen that take place with individual investors. And the fact is there is also a very active group of clients who are individual investors who are often also working through private investment corporations, which are not necessarily qualified to be exempt from the suitability regulations. And so, we do think that it would make sense if the same sort of exemptions that have been available for family offices could be made for these individuals or for their PICs as well.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I think, first of all, thanks to PWMA's contribution and also Jeremy's co-leadership in the family office paper that we actually put forward back in 2020 as well. I think some of the recommendations have been implemented by the government, and the government is also considering other issues, for instance, tax-related matters in accordance with the suggestions in our earlier paper. And I think it is only right to set the right framework and to make it applicable across the board for the high net worth individuals as well as the corporations that you mentioned earlier. So, Mark, I know that you're in Spain and waking up very early for this webinar. Got a quick question for you first. As mentioned in the paper, digitalization is a prevailing trend in the PWM industry. How is digitalization shaping the recent regulatory landscape, compliance practices, and customer experience in Hong Kong? What are some of the challenges faced by the PWM industry in this digitalization journey?
Okay, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. Sorry, I'm in Devon, actually in the UK, not Spain, but I'll be off to Portugal.
My bad.
That's fine. Digitalization is moving very quickly in the industry, and in fact, we saw the SFC came out with a circular last week, I think it was, looking at the sort of non-face-to-face onboarding of brokerage, distribution, and advisory services. One of the points that sort of came through in that SFC circular, one of many, and perhaps one that I will sort of start with, and which sort of follows some of the themes that Jeremy and Peter have already been discussing, is onboarding and sort of AML, CFT, KYC. Now, I will start off by saying, as both Peter and Jeremy have reiterated, compliance with AML, CFT requirements is absolutely paramount for a credible, good reputational financial market. Hong Kong has to comply with the Financial Action Task Force recommendations, and so there's no debate about compliance with those requirements. The FATFA requirements and the Hong Kong AML CFT requirements do permit a risk-based approach, and I do think that the industry takes the more cautious line around that risk-based approach. And I think that is one of the reasons why we see account opening taking 36 days, which is sort of slightly down from the 40 days of a year or two ago. But what I would like to sort of see to address the onboarding bit, and there's no point, frankly, having a fantastic digitalization structure if we can't onboard people efficiently in a non-face-to-face manner. So I do think that it would be helpful to have more guidance, more FAQs issued by the regulators, or at least supported by the regulators, so that banks and other wealth managers can really understand where they can take a risk-based approach in terms of tackling AML and CFT, and where AML and CFT is likely to be low risk, and so a risk-based approach can be taken. Back in 2018, we issued a paper through the FSDC looking at KYC utilities. I think that is something that we should sort of continue to look at. I think Hong Kong has done a great thing with the I Am Smart package, and I think that sort of works well, or should work well. Of course, it's reasonably new in relation to onboarding Hong Kong clients. But as we know, Hong Kong is an international hub, so we need to have a system, a technology, which actually promotes rapid and efficient onboarding of non-Hong Kong clients. Although I didn't know actually until we started doing this paper what I Am Smart stood for. And for those that don't, it's internet access by mobile in a smart way. So I quite like that, I must admit. So, I think that we start with that sort of whole onboarding piece and looking at that AML CFT risk that we need to manage, and we can't compromise on the integrity of those rules. But I think that we do need to try and find a way that reduces the compliance cost in terms of onboarding. And I think that enhancing a KYC utility would help with that. But I also think that it would be helpful to have more guidance from or support from the regulators as to where risks can be taken, adopting that risk-based approach. Maybe I'll sort of stop there. I know I've only just sort of looked at the onboarding bit, but I think that we'll come on to the professional investor and suitability bits in subsequent questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think we need to strike a fine balance between risk mitigation as well as the user friendliness of our system and the policy as well as regulations. Okay, so Jeremy, coming back to you, I have a question in relation to our connectivity with the mainland part of things. So obviously, mainland China has the highest number of billionaires in the world. And with the introduction of the Cross-Boundary Wealth Management Connect last year, what are some implications and opportunities that Hong Kong can potentially benefit from? And why are we, Hong Kong, considered the ideal agent for managing private wealth for these ultra high net worth individuals in mainland China?
Yeah, thank you, Rocky. I think in terms of immediate benefits is that clearly through these pilot programs and one of the more recent ones being the Wealth Management Connect, it is just opening up to Hong Kong a greater population of the mainland investment community. Which the numbers you quoted are significant. It also positions Hong Kong really, I think, as its position as China's offshore financial center, and it also plays well into Hong Kong's importance as a sort of an overall sort of fund management center and the ability to offer wealth management and all the relevant services around that in or from Hong Kong. And I think that with all these programs, they start off, sometimes they're a bit more sort of restrictive in terms of the type of products that can be offered, and again, to whom that it can be offered. But typically what happens over time is that once those have proved successful, they're proved to be sort of fit for purpose, the cross-border regulatory cooperation basically works. It just then broadens. So I think in terms of opportunities, it really, certainly the Wealth Management Connect, I think really was a game changer in being able to offer sort of Hong Kong domiciled product to a sort of specific category of mainland investors, and a significant number. So I think at least sort of, that potentially sort of qualify. You've got a sort of a geographical population of at least sort of 72 million. So it really broadens the potential sort of investor base. It is also increasing the sort of connectivity with financial organizations themselves across border, because I mean, as part of the scheme, Hong Kong banks basically need to partner with a sort of a mainland bank. And so really it again, all of this sort of initiative is just connecting Hong Kong more and more with the mainland. And I think that's going to be the direction of travel. And in terms of why Hong Kong, remains well placed to do that, is that we are a services centre. So we have all the required talent sitting here. It's international, it's local, and it's been here for a long time, and it's sort of developed Hong Kong into an international financial centre. And now really we're able to sort of play a role, a rightful role as part of the sort of the GVA. So I think there's a huge potential. And as I said, the ability to sort of start to roll this out to an increased investor base from a sort of private banking perspective, I just think that really is going to be the opportunity going forward.
Jeremy, I love how you put it, international and local. It's almost like we're bipolar, but like we are, in fact, carrying out such a role. Like we're international as a city, but we are local within the GBA. At the same time, I think it not only Wealth Management Connect doesn't only bring benefits to the PWM industry per se, but also the fund management industry as well as the professional services bodies and organizations in this area serving these FIs, and obviously connecting and gelling how the mainland FIs are operating with that in Hong Kong and other places is also another layer of benefit that is brought to us by the introduction of the Wealth Management Connect. So Peter, we in the paper proposed the introduction of a couple of classification. One is the sophisticated PI classification, and the other is an asset-based PI test, which is going to allow the stability obligations to be disapplied. Obviously, this is some of the suggestions that we have received from PWM practitioners. What are some of the benefits that would bring to the industry?
So firstly, Rocky, let me actually talk about the benefits for clients, right? Because ultimately, that's what matters. The suitability regulations that are in place now do protect many clients who are relatively unfamiliar with investing. But there are also clients, as I was mentioning before, who are sophisticated and experienced traders, and for whom the checks and disclosures that need to be conducted as part of the suitability process are, in a word, superfluous. And more than that, they can actually be an impediment to trading activity. As for example, when a relationship manager is required to conduct extensive risk disclosures or assess concentration risk ahead of a time-sensitive trade. And allowing those clients to be able to opt up for treatment as a sophisticated professional investor using an asset-based PI approach would give them the option to forego these checks and these disclosures in favor of a more streamlined, more efficient process that would benefit them, as well as benefiting the banks. Now, for the banks and other financial institutions, the benefit is that it allows them to better service this segment of their client base. They're conducting the checks and balances that are necessary for these clients, but not going beyond that if it's not required. And because they're not doing beyond what is actually necessary to these clients, they're able to save in terms of some of the costs that needs to go into providing these suitability checks. They may need fewer people in order to conduct due diligence on products that these people trade. So it's going to, be beneficial to their profitability. And then overall for Hong Kong, this is beneficial because it makes Hong Kong more competitive versus other jurisdictions that are also in the private wealth management game. For instance, Singapore, which what our members say and many clients say benefits from the fact that it has a relatively streamlined regulatory environment that is considered to be pretty well suited to the private wealth management space. So we think that this would ultimately be beneficial for Hong Kong as a whole.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Peter. I think what we are attempting to do is really providing a sort of segmentation for even high net worth individuals and experienced traders. So we're not asking for a blanket removal of the existing practice, right? We are really just trying to have another layer that allows sophisticated people to deal with it with less restrictive measures. And hopefully this is going to be attended to. Mark, you also deal a lot with not only the FIs, but also other institutions as well as individuals. So what are some pain points that you have heard in this regard, perhaps with a focus on the legal part, because suitability is already some of the pain points were already highlighted and explained by Peter, but then I'm sure you still have others to add.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rocky. And I can sort of come to part two of that earlier question as well about digitalization. So whoever was that's asking that and waiting for it, that's the reason why. So look, there's a number of sort of pain points, and I like the way that Peter sort of describes it in terms of looking at it from a customer experience. And again, we do need to sort of make sure that suitability works. And there's been issues in the past in Hong Kong, post sort of Asia financial crisis, global financial crisis, where there were sort of issues around suitability. But the world has sort of moved on from a paper-based approach, a relationship management sort of type of face-to-face approach to wealth management. And coming back to that earlier question with digitalization. And so, I'll give one example, and that is looking at sort of online access to products. Looking also at, I think, an increasingly sophisticated investor universe where they actually have access through all sorts of communications and media portals, a range of products. Now, under the recent, was it 2019, I think it was, code or circulars and code amendments that the SFC introduced, we introduced a concept called complex and non-complex products. By definition, most of our high net worth investors are looking at products which are complex. They can access those products, as I say, because they read about them somewhere, or they actually sort of pop up online. The private wealth firm has to do suitability in relation to those products. So if we have a client that does go out and find a product, says, what do you think? I want to buy this. Maybe it's an execution only. The intermediary has to sort of stop, think. They have to go through a rigorous suitability process for actually an investor or a client that's already made up his mind that he wants to actually buy that product. So we end up by sort of creating creating is not the right word actually. We end up by applying this regulatory framework to a circumstance where in the vast majority, if not all cases, it frankly isn't necessary. So I do think that it's time to sort of actually look at these sort of different strands of professional investor, looking at how sophisticated PIs can opt out, looking at a slightly higher, I suppose not slightly higher, it's a significantly higher net worth test where we can disapply suitability. Now, the regulators will tell you, quite rightly, that just because you have wealth doesn't mean to say that you understand the products. And I don't disagree with that. But equally, I would also suggest that if you've managed to create a sufficient amount of wealth, you've probably got some common sense around you, and you can decide whether you want to sort of opt in or opt out and make some decisions for yourself. So I do think it's a good opportunity to just actually sort of revisit that customer, that investor experience around qualifying people as PIs and looking at the suitability requirements. And again, looking back to that SFC circular that came out last week, the couple of points that sort of came out of that, which I think is relevant to this. Now, that circular wasn't looking at the position from a wealth management standpoint. It was just looking at online brokerage, distribution, advisory services. But they recognised that the vast proportion of clients or intermediaries that they surveyed are now doing non-face-to-face transactions. So, the world of digitalisation is here. One area, apart from the AML bits that I talked about earlier, that the SFC sort of highlighted was suitability. The fact that that the intermediaries weren't understanding the products that were being offered sufficiently well. Now, that is a cornerstone of suitability. You need to understand the product. But when you start looking at this sort of online world and non-solicitation, I would argue that there's room there to waive suitability requirements for the right individuals, for the right corporate PIs. So that's one of the reasons why we're urging the government to have a look at the framework in this paper, but in a measured way, which doesn't again compromise the foundations of suitability.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I think that's why we use digitalization as the thread to sew everything together and for this paper. And then also you highlight again that we are really recommending the provision of the options for qualified people to opt in or opt out. We are not mandating this to be done for everybody. Providing an option is very important. Moving on to the last part of this kind of discussion, I'm going to ask a few questions in relation to the talent side of things. Peter, obviously our private wealth management industry is good because of the talent we have, in town. The PWMA has devoted much effort in developing talent in the PWM industry, and perhaps you can highlight to the audience some of the present issues with regard to growing the talent pipeline for the industry, and what are some of the roles that the universities and other training, perhaps in training organizations can look into.
Sure, Rocky. So, in a nutshell, the biggest problem that the industry is facing is that there just isn't enough talent to fill the demand that we're seeing, which is being driven by the growth in AUM that is turning Hong Kong, not only into currently the second biggest manager of offshore wealth in the world, according to BCG, but potentially in the next year or two into the top manager of offshore wealth. But unlike Switzerland, which currently ranks #1, we really don't have a systematic way of training people from the entry level up into more sophisticated professional positions for managing other people's wealth. We're very proud of the PWMA of the pilot apprenticeship program for private wealth management, which we run in partnership with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and which has led to the training of more than 280 university students in private wealth management since the program was founded in 2017. But frankly, that's not enough. Not all of those students end up going into the industry. Not all of them take jobs. Not all of them stay in jobs. We need more people. We need more people joining, from the university level. We need more people joining from the mid-career level. And in order to make that possible, you need to have more options available to people who are interested in these fields at the university and postgraduate level. Currently we have an undergraduate degree at Hong Kong University, which allows people to study asset and wealth management. There is one postgraduate degree that I'm aware of. We need more. It would be great if we could see other institutions following in the lead of the ones that have already started this, so that we can get more people the opportunity to enter the industry by giving them the training that they can acquire while they're in school, and making them more attractive candidates for the industry. Because right now, what's happening is that the industry tends to poach qualified individuals from their peers. There's kind of a merry-go-round where the best people just get hired from one firm into another, the salaries go up, and frankly, that's just not a sustainable approach.
Makes a lot of sense. And you highlighted, a program that King also teaches in. So King, naturally, that really comes to you for the last question. From your experience, besides running, our operation at the FSDC, what are some of the areas that Hong Kong could do more in terms of attracting PWM talents?
Right. So in the interest of time, I'll just highlight a couple of key points. I think Peter has already said a lot. what we need is really to use a more industry scale apprenticeship type approach, and also extending the training, not just the students, but existing practitioners, upskilling them. There are a lot of skill set that can be portable from different sectors of the industry to the PWM, like legal and compliance, operation, and even technology. This is what I want to highlight. The PWM is not just an industry for finance students. Actually, I came across the best sales lady who did her degree in psychology. So that's all for me. Thanks. I think we have got questions from the floor.
Fantastic. So we have some questions from the floor. I'll fire the first question away. Is from Mr. Kim Man Wong. Obviously, in a neighboring city-state here in Asia, we see that that country is benefiting from quite a bit of this ongoing situation here in Hong Kong as a result, and it is building itself to be the private wealth management center. So what can Hong Kong do to gain some businesses back, going forward? I think naturally that's a question for you, Peter.
Sure. I mean, I think all of the things that we were talking about in this paper are really designed to make Hong Kong a more competitive global private wealth management center. So, there's no question in my mind that if we were to act on the proposals in this paper, they would do a lot to make Hong Kong competitive, not just versus Singapore, but frankly, versus any private wealth management jurisdiction around the world. I do think that on top of that, Hong Kong could probably do a better job of marketing itself, because the fact is we do have a number of huge advantages as a private wealth management center that sometimes get undersold, to be honest. And I think the more that we can communicate these advantages effectively to the right audience, the more we can hold on to the business and grab more of the business that rightfully should be in Hong Kong.
Right, market development is obviously one of the mandates. King, perhaps you may have something to add to, how best we can strengthen our value proposition to the private wealth management industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very good question from the floor. But I think short term, we definitely have a lot of headwinds, as I said at the opening. But I think we need to recognize our core strength, which is being part of China, one country, two system. I think that cannot be replaced. Also, with a lot of the new initiatives that are coming out, such as the latest possibility of international companies listing on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and being included in this slide. So Hong Kong has a lot of potential for expanding our wealth management industry just beyond just the region, but actually becoming a global asset management hub. So imagine you can invest in a lot of blue-chip names in Hong Kong, Asian time zone. Yeah,
absolutely. So opportunities are there. We need to, continue to work with the government and regulators such that some of our recommendations will be implemented, and then I guess that will bring a lot of businesses back to Hong Kong. So in the interest of time, we are coming to the close of this session. But if I may, please do stay with us. We are going to have some important questions, and it will be good to have your feedback. And thank you again for joining us today. Look forward to having you again in the upcoming publication and report launch ceremony.